My name's Taylor Sherrill, and I am an LEd sped major. And I started my student teaching at Meadow Lane in 4th grade, and then I continued it, and I'm still doing it at Roper in special ed, kindergarten through 2nd grade. And I chose to do my capstone project with the theme of assessment practices and professional judgment. And I have laid out my artifacts in the learning stage, the planning stage, and then also where I am at now, the practicing stage and student teaching. I've included my competency statement, my guiding questions, my professional growth, and then also my connection, synthesis, and future goals. So to start with my competency statement, where I feel like I have grown the most and I know most about, my competency is I am competent at creating formative assessments to monitor student progress and understanding. And throughout my project, I will use these 2 guiding questions that I will answer throughout my project. What are the components of good assessment? And how do formative assessments inform teaching? So to start first, my learning Artifact 1 will be 2 lesson plans. One of them will be from my very first practicum at Hill Elementary, and then my second one that kind of goes right after that experience is in math block, will be also another lesson plan. And then when I come to my planning stage, it will be an assessment project that I did with a peer over one individual student. And then in my practicing stage, I will show you how I've created my own formative assessments to show my growth in understanding assessment practices. So to start with my learning stage, my artifact number 1, I had my first practicum at Hill Elementary, and this was a phonics lesson where they were learning about different sounds and different words. And my evaluation that I have highlighted here, I will get students involved in the lesson to know that they are understanding. And then in order for my assessment, what I planned to do was to go around and just give them smiley faces. So to me, after I've been through all of my learning, planning, and practicing stages, I know that that was not a great way of showing assessment and showing that the students did understand my lesson. And then for math block, to kind of get a little bit further into my experience, I use the evaluation and assessment skill of questioning, where I question the whole class at the end of my lesson to show their understanding of the skill that was taught that lesson. Now, I understand that assessment questioning is a great way of assessing, but it's very important as a teacher to kind of take that data from the questioning in order to further the teaching down the road and show that the students did understand. So that was the learning stage where I just had my very first few lessons and I didn't really have a good understanding of assessment. So then I move into my planning stage, where I did an assessment project with a peer in math block, and this was just with an individual student. So we focused on one individual student and showed his progress. In my planning stage, I have highlighted a couple key words. So understand, progress, showing progress, fundamental of his understanding, just to have those keywords to show that I was using assessment to understand that he was also understanding. So down here, my representation of student progress, we originally started with a math task where he had to show understanding of multiplication, comparison, and fractions. And we used the representation of student progress by showing that he had a great understanding at the beginning of the very first task, and then he also kept that understanding throughout. And then with comparison and fractions, those were kind of the new skills that he was learning, and he showed some understanding at the beginning, and then throughout the tasks, he showed better understanding than great understanding. So we were able to use his formative assessments to show that progress. And these here, I have just a couple different pages of his formative assessment that we used to show his understanding of those skills. We used a couple homework sheets, and then also his unit test. We just kind of used that as a formative assessment rather than a summative assessment to show his understanding of those skills. And so that working with a peer on that with just an individual student was very helpful in my planning stage so that I could use the learning that I had from my very first few lessons and use that within this project. Now I see this assessment project kind of as a limitation because you're only doing it with one individual student, and it's not always going to be, you're not always going to have that capability as a teacher. You're not always going to be able to pull one student and assess them on just one learning target. So that would be kind of a limitation that I think about when it comes to this assessment project. You're not able to just do that with each individual student with a class of 20 to 25. And so I'm going to move into my practicing stage where I am now in student teaching, and I have been able to create my own formative assessments. This one right here is an example of an exit ticket that I created for the end of a math lesson. And down here is actually my favorite part of my exit ticket. It's a self-assessment. It says, I am not quite there in, and it gives the students an option to circle what they feel like they are still not understanding or they don't quite grasp that skill yet. And so I give that to them, and then this here, their exit ticket was actually given to them on a targeted instruction day. So it was where they were showing their understanding of skills throughout that whole math unit. And so that self-assessment down there, I see it also kind of as a limitation on this formative assessment piece, because if you look at their homework that they've turned in throughout that unit, maybe they're showing understanding and rounding numbers, but then when you gave them that self-assessment, they circled rounding numbers. So that correlation doesn't match up, and so I could see that as a limitation, and the teacher would have to kind of look further into that. I also have in my practicing stage created different worksheets for math, and then also for writing, I have students do a writing sample for me to show their understanding of writing skills that I've taught in lessons. And then reading as well, I normally do like an exit ticket where they write me something. So maybe it was a vocabulary word, write me the definition of the vocabulary word, so that they're showing me that understanding through an exit ticket or a writing sample, depending on the subject that I was teaching during that. And then overall, for my synthesis and connection right here, I have the two big ideas that I've learned about assessment is a big part of student success and is used to be sure that each student has the opportunity to reach his or her full potential, because I see that as a very important part of teaching, and that actually falls into my teaching philosophy, where I really strive to have each student reach their full potential. And I feel like assessment and looking at the data of students' progress is one big piece of understanding if a student is reaching their full potential. And then also assessment is able to show what students may specifically need. So whether that be maybe individual instruction on a skill, group intervention, maybe where you move from classroom to group specific students together based on what they are understanding or what they may not be. And then also possibly challenging and extending that instruction to maybe more diff if students need to be a little bit more challenged. So I think of assessment being able to help you understand on where students may need to be grouped or how they should be grouped. And then assessment also allows teachers to rethink their past lessons. So say one of them maybe their whole class maybe isn't performing well on a certain task. Teachers are able to go back and use formative assessments, maybe exit tickets, for example, there to see students aren't understanding of specific skills. So they go back and they say, I really need to go back and reteach that lesson so that they can get their whole class, whether that be the majority of them or the whole class, to understand that specific skill. And then I'm going to move into my reflection and my professional growth, which I have lined up as my learning, planning, and practicing, where red is my learning stage. Red, I said I did not have an understanding of how important assessment was to help further and monitor students' progress. And then in the yellow there for my planning stage, I had a better understanding of assessment, but really I only understood how to individually assess students because this project specifically was over one individual student. And then for the green, where I am now, my practicing, I've created my own formative assessments to help those students with a specific skill or a wide variety of skills, and it helps, that shows and demonstrates my understanding of the importance of using assessment to show and monitor students' progress. And then my future goals, I want to understand and use different methods of formative assessment. So I've used a couple and created a couple, but I want to understand more and be able to use different methods in different subjects in school and with different students depending on their needs. And then research and develop assessment methods to evaluate learning. I think about talking with my peers and my colleagues to be able to understand and develop different assessments that work throughout a whole grade level that you're working with, maybe your grade level team, or even talking with other grade levels to see what's working depending on the needs of the students that you're working with. And then the very last future goal is to attend professional developments that focus on assessment. based on practices. So thinking about going to those different classes, going to those meetings at school to develop yourself professionally, but specifically go to those ones that are talking about assessment and how you can better assessment for the needs in your classroom or the needs in your school. So again, overall, I showed you my learning stage, my planning stage, and my practicing stage to show how I've grown to understand my theme of assessment practices and professional judgment, and show my understanding that I have grown a lot and understand that formative assessment is very important. So I feel I am competent at creating formative assessments to monitor student progress and understanding.